And today we'll be talking about Joshua's journey from first identifying with INFJ to going to Istp. So I'd love to dive into the depth of this with you. And so Joshua, he's actually looked at psychological types and read Carl Jung's work. So you know he's super nerdy about type and that he's really studied this in depth. And I've even seen the citations in your videos. You actually cite people who are very deep Jungians and into type in not just a Myers-Briggs way, but in a Jungian way. And so you know that he's done his research here. So,
I'm still a beginner.
oh, so
Yeah.
humble
So
of
like,
you.
so no, like, I do mean it. I think, like normally I don't really consider myself as very deep in Yang. Usually, like I like when I introduce myself to my audience, I'm a bit like professional in MBTI, but like, I'm still like learning typologies, and I'm definitely like a beginner of like Yang psychology. Yeah, I think there's so much more about him, like uh broader than typology. So about that part, I'm not as familiar.
Today, we're here to talk about your journey to figuring out your type and how it's been like. We can start by giving people a summary, or you can illustrate your journey however you feel like it's fit to share about your story.
For me, it's always a little bit difficult for me to make a summary of stuffs, like because summary always feels like a little bit like inaccurate, and but I would try my best. Like I would love to do that. Okay, so basically, I started to be very interested into psychology during high school because like I selected like one of these electives. Like we studied like abnormal psychology as one of the electives in high school, and that was really interesting. The major reason why I I started to be enthusiastic about psychology is to figure out like how like people's mind work. Why am I so different from the others, and why are others so different from me? So like it sounds really like fit the core of like typology. So like when I was in touch with typology, like first it was like MBTI. I was really interested into it. It provides me with a model of understanding of people's mind. I was once so fascinated by all those tests. I've done many of the tests, and I recommend those to my friends, and I help them understand their results. Although it was like eventually I found out that most of my interpretations wasn't that accurate, but I had fun there. And and as the journey goes, I start to dig into deeper level of this understanding of typology. I start to take some courses. I've read like professional books, books written by experts, and then I start to having this uh, confusion. I think most of people who love types, who study types, will definitely encounter. So first, it's about the confusion of type itself. It was like, is it really a thing? I mean, there seems to be so much ambiguity among all those types. I could like imagine myself being any of them. It's just a matter of different circumstance. I would have different reaction, different thoughts, different ways to put my mind. And then like I start to dig into it deeper and deeper. The turning point is when I start to book sessions with different counselors in type, because when that happens, it feels like I could finally connect type with my real life during the session. Like how we talk right now, it was like it is one-on-one, face-to-face. I could really share some of my private thoughts. I could really share like whatever comes to my mind. It could be really like concrete, tangible, and specific. I think that's really helpful for me instead of getting in touch with all those concepts. Although like some books having very enriched examples, but those are still from the other perspective, from the other person's side. When in the sessions of counseling, I am able to talk from my side, from my own perspective. But like I was typed as INFJ in some of the type counseling after I've done like more and more counseling, and then I start to receive different results, and those makes me having different understanding of myself, and to really like have a fair comparison like between different types. It turned out that ISTP is the most like reasonable one. It makes much more sense than like the other types I've received.
Yeah, and you had quite a few reasons for this too. And so you mentioned you're antsy, you need to move around a lot, and so that's the extroverted sensing. I'm wondering what other things, or if you could go into why ISTP.
That's one of the most asked questions after I publicly share about the change of my type. I could go to be very specific and tangible. I'm constantly aware of my motivation of interacting with the world tangibly. That's a very constant motivation for me. It affects my life on a very deep level. When I thought myself as an INFJ, I had this misunderstanding of my relationship with extroverted sensing. My criteria of me using extroverted sensing were always associated with whether I was successful or not. When I engaged into a sport, if I win, for me, it was like a successful application of extroverted sensing. When I try to make some like immediate movements, try to interact with the physical world, when I get positive response, then I consider that like a successful application of extroverted sensing. From that perspective, which was wrong, I told myself that, okay, see, Joshua, you are not good with extroverted sensing because you always fail. That's just a really common but mistaken way of understanding type, like cognitive processes, because it's not really about whether or not you fail. The fact that I keep failing, yet I'm still so enthusiastic about it, I think it helps a lot. I don't really view all those failings to be some lessons that I must learn. For me, they were all just experience. In the end of the day, I don't really care if I fail or not. What's important is I'm moving my body freely. I'm making this reaction freely, like based on my gut feeling at the moment, and it feels like smooth. It feels like nature, and that's what makes me feel like me. Yeah.
Yeah, the extroverted sensing puts you to a state of flow. It's not necessarily if you win a game, but it's just the process of doing it feels like home. It feels natural, as you put it.
Yes.
Yeah, and so you mentioned there's this just do it attitude to you too. And I wondered if you could go into that a little bit.
In almost like every video I make, I would remind my audience that examples are just hints or like what helps you to understand the concept. It couldn't really be any evidence. But I do have a lot of examples. My parents used to write me back from school when I was still in my primary school. I always had this curiosity or had this rush when I look at the wheel of the bicycle. I had this rush to touch it, and eventually I did. I got my foot hurt badly. But yeah, I mean, I don't really learn the lesson, because for me, I think the rewards isn't, okay, did I get a good result from it? It's like I could have my enriched experience of the physical world, of the entire world around me, to touch it, to really feel it, to sense it like really directly, really without any premise, without any assumption. When I go to like any mall or supermarket with my parents, I'm always the one who's like touching everything. There's some level of curiosity there for sure, but it's just, it feels like if I don't touch stuffs, I've never been there. After I got to like really play it with my hands, try to like see it, look at in a closer way, in a great detailed way, I could have this sense of, okay, like I've played this, I've played that. That could like really leave some impression for me.
Mm, yeah, if you don't touch it, it doesn't feel like it really is real or it's really happening. So
Yes,
the experience makes it more real. It's like,
it is.
let's
Yes.
try it, let's do it.
Yes. I you put that in such an elegant and simple way.
Exactly, yes. I like to summarize what audience members say. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, thank you. That's really well articulated. And you mentioned that in the yearbook, the way that people described you also showed your type as well, in a way too. Like they would tell you you're critical in the yearbook.
When I look back, I really feel that we have such a different perspectives. The way I viewed myself was so different from the way my classmates and my teachers did. I mean, different teachers also had different perspectives. It's just, it really amazed me. I thought myself to be quite gentle, quite friendly. I think I am even like fragile. So like I could got hurt really easily by what my friends said or what my friends did to me. I could even like thought about it for an entire day because one of my friends refused to went back together with me. I thought myself to be even like oversensitive about relationships, about like people's feelings. But like from my classmates' perspective, like what they wrote in my yearbook, they said like, 嘴炮, it was like saying that your mouth is so sharp. So like basically they're saying that, okay, like Joshua, you're such a debater and you have this, you're very critical. And when I really look back at myself fairly with evidence, I mean, I could actually find a lot of evidence to support, their summary about me. I, I, I often had arguments with teachers because I found like what they said wasn't like accurate enough or could be misunderstood. It is not that I couldn't really understand what they said. It is that I could imagine some ways of misunderstand it. And then I couldn't really bear with it. I thought they should clarify on it more so that like there would leave no room for misunderstanding whatsoever, which it's an impossible task for teachers. So I'm really sorry for them, but yeah, that's me. Like some of my friends even told me that they they thought having me on the class was such a fun thing because they could watch me debate with teachers.
I could totally see that. The introverted thinking wants to make sure that it says things that are accurate. I even notice the way that you talk, you'll correct yourself as you're talking because like you think what you said could even be more accurate, so you pause. It's like a TI accuracy pause, and then you'll resume once you figure out how to say it more precisely. And so like I can like notice you doing the internal audit. And even when I'm not being accurate enough, I'm like, oh, you know a lot about Jung. You're like, I know about Jungian typology. I'm just learning about Jung's work, which is the typology is such a small sliver of all his work. So don't misrepresent me. It's just not true. And I'm also seeing the extroverted feeling too in what you're sharing. So I find with TI dominance, so ISTPs or INTPs, some of them can actually be really broken by relationships not working well. So that there's actually an extreme pain around the aspirational function. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like there's a yearning for relationships. In fact, I find there are some ISTPs or INTPs that find some level of motivation through
Mm-hmm.
being in relationships or having relationships, and they feel less motivated when there's not a relationship propelling them forward for some of them. And so, like, in a way, like relationships are everything because they're so hard to make and they're so hard to maintain or they're so hard to keep that you don't want to lose them because it hurts when you lose them because then now you have to find them. Like, it's a lot of effort and there's a lot of pain around that. Yeah, and I noticed like sometimes these types, if they're also Enneagram 9, it can also amplify the amount of sensitivity or gentleness that they
Mm-hmm.
have, although they still have the criticalness and sharp tongue of being a TI dominant. So,
Yes, I agree with you. Like I'm English isn't my first language. So basically, thanks for my extroverted sensing. When I throw myself into like an interview like this with English and trying to depict myself accurately with the language that I'm not like perfectly on. I think it takes a lot of extrovert sensing to do so. Basically, that is that like I don't really give a second thought about it. The deeper I thought about it, the more worried I could get myself into. That okay, like what if I misrepresent myself? What if I said some words wrongly? What if I made like a grammar mistakes? There was so many like yeah, like I think but thanks for extroverted sensing, I could just tell myself just do it. And I'm fine with it. And I mean I really like it. I'm thrilled to make those reactions, to make those response like immediately. And that's the reason why I mentioned with you like earlier that I really enjoy like live stream. I enjoy it more than making videos actually. Yeah, it feels like it feels much easier for me.
Mhm. Yeah, because you can just do it, whereas the editing is more tedious, and now you have stuff you have to do later, and it's like a lot of stuff piling up that in the future you has to deal with. It's not as cool to do that. And during your live streams, you also mentioned that you had a commenter ask, Joshua, why do you like to do live streams and answer our questions? And you were like, I like the problem solving aspect of it. It's actually, it really deals with my TI. It's, yeah. And so in some way,
Uh,
TI dominance can also really like,
in live stream I could actually like uh answer different questions. So like every question my audience asks was like a challenge for me. It was almost like puzzles, like different shapes of puzzles that I need to put it together. But I have to confess that like sometimes I got quite bored or irritated by silly questions. Although like it's silly questions in the way that like people learn stuffs from zero. Of course, there's gonna be a lot of questions that they don't understand, which were considered really fundamental from my perspectives. But still, like when it is too much, I could be a bit bored. Yeah, so
yeah.
it's like I really want my puzzle games to be a challenging enough. Like I played a lot of video games.
Hmm.
I often intentionally create dangerous situations in my video games so that I could experience the challenging perspectives of it.
Mm. Yeah, and it also gets your introverted thinking to look at the parameters of the situation. Now, how can I adapt to make the most of the situation? Yeah, you like that element of experimentation.
Yes, I do. And it could be fun in some perspectives and it could like get myself in some real hideous stuffs. I think that would was due to my procrastination. I finished one of my graduation paper, which was like about 20,000 words, and in like a week, and including all those research and book readings. I slept only 2 days that week. While I was doing that, I didn't feel a thing. I think every single cell of me was just engaging into the job, getting the job done. And I didn't really having this feeling of tiredness, feeling of like boredom, feeling of like fear. But afterwards, when I recall it was also nothing. It's gone, so it's gone. I'm really like happy I have a brain like this.
Yeah, so what's in the past is in the past. You're now in the present moving forward. So it's not something you really look back on. So it seems like there's a pressure promptedness to you. You're okay with doing things last minute. The rush of it actually gets you to focus and engage, and you actually feel chill and calm in these kind of high pressure crisis situations. It's almost like you get down to a level-headedness rather than feeling any sort of anxiety, which could be the extroverted sensing kicking into gear when you need it. So,
Yes, I think the uh the time period when I experienced the highest level of anxiety was the like was the day right before I started it. It was like I was so worried that what if I couldn't really finish it? What if I failed it? But once I started to do it, I just tell myself, okay, like Joshua, just do it. Like what else could you do? You put yourself in a you trapped yourself in a place where you got no second option, so just face it.
Yeah, just do it. The theme of today's chat.
Mm,
Nike is not sponsoring this video, guys,
no,
even though they love the phrase. So,
yes.
yeah, and you mentioned how one of the reasons why you can be confused for an INFJ is your FE looks more developed because you used to do public speaking. You had to, and it was a part of your church activities too. And so you really had to flex the muscle.
Most of the misunderstanding of types, especially like cognitive functions, cognitive processes, we can be trained or nurtured to be aware of some certain perspectives in certain circumstance. It could be trained like perfectly. Like for instance, if your parents told you pay attention to your tone, pay attention to your attitude, pay attention to other people's feeling. If they told you that like repeatedly, like when you were still a child, and you got like a perfect chance to be aware of that. But it doesn't makes me aware of like extroverted feeling in all circumstances. It definitely makes me aware of extrovert feeling in the circumstance which my parents constantly told me to. But in other circumstances, it wasn't. But still, but it's good enough for me to misunderstand myself to be very consideration in the manners, in the attitudes, in the consideration of other people's feelings. And also because I majored in psychology in my undergraduate, and I mastered in what they call mediation, like in conflicts resolutions. It all sounds really extroverted feeling, right? You have to like mediate, you have to harmonize like people. Yeah, so I'm quite equipped with the skills and the the technology to do so. Like, so I think that plays a very important role in my misunderstanding of my type. But like the misunderstanding went away once I started to make a distinction between being aware of some like the cognitive process in certain circumstance and being comfortable with it. I think that makes the distinction.
Yeah, makes sense. We can be trained to be aware of it in certain circumstances, but it doesn't mean that it's an inborn preference. And so just like you can train a left-handed person to write with their right hand, it doesn't mean that they're
Mm,
right-handed. And the left-handed preference is it might be silent and dormant in that specific situation, but when it's allowed to come up and when it's the right circumstance, you'll see more of that dominant function come into play.
yeah.
And so, as we're closing up this interview, I'm wondering, Joshua, do you have any final points you'd like to make or any message you'd like to give to someone who is on their type journey, trying to figure out their type?
I have several like advice. The first is I always tell my audience there are two types of circumstance. Like one is could be called like weak circumstance. One could be called like strong circumstance. In the sense that like in strong circumstance, the circumstance are the like protagonists of the story. For instance, you are just a student and the teacher asked me to finish the homework. I mean, that's very strong circumstance in the way that it's very hard for you to say no. It's a very specific way that you have been told how to reply, right? And in all those like strong circumstances that will affect, for instance, your life, your job, your career, your family, your academics, and the behaviors that you do in those circumstances couldn't really show the real you, the real self of you. They could very well be your persona, like, or like probably like even your ego, if it is deep enough. I think the distinction between these two types of circumstance could be very helpful in the way that if you don't really have this freedom to choose, how could you choose based on your own will? And frankly speaking, we barely get that freedom. We always get some level of freedom, but there's always some level of freedom that is deprived from us. So yeah, I think be aware of that could be really helpful. But it also leads to a very disappointed conclusion for some type enthusiasts, because like your behavior are very deeply influenced by circumstance, by your experience, by your parents' education, by like the school you went, the culture, like the place around you, like the people around you. So types couldn't really do that. Like types could predict, like I think it could predict quite well like your motivations, like the motivations behind like your behaviors. It's not even the reasons of your behavior, it's the motivation. I think it's quite different, because the motivations, they're different like directions. For instance, if you want to experience the world directly, you could experience it via very different methods. You could do that with watching a lot of films, reading a lot of books. Like some books, they really tell you the enriched detail of the world. But like you could also like experience it by yourself, like go traveling, or you could watch a films. So like there's multiple ways of doing that. It's just impossible to associate, types with behaviors. If you say someone talk very slowly, and you believe that that's the sign of introverted intuiting. I mean, it could be a hint for you to dig into it, but it's never the evidence. And after all those years, like I have in type community, I think from my perspective, the most important reason that lead people to confusion is that we all have our own logic and language system. You can see what I say are very associated with my type. But we all have this very own logic and language system in the way that we understand the same term very differently. When I say that I had a very deep conversation with someone, it could mean very differently from your perspective. The way I understand the term deep could be very different from your understanding. So that's why, like, for instance, if we make some videos saying that, okay, like introverted feelings having this triads, stuff like that, they are that and that. But like different people could perceive it so differently, understand so differently, in a way that they all believe that they are introverted feeler. I mean, let's not use the term. They all believe that they prefer the introverted feeling, but in the end, they were just talking about like very different stuffs. But then, like some people might ask, so if in that case, how could we really know our types? It comes from a more sophisticated understanding of stuffs. By like more sophisticated, I mean that you understand stuffs from different layers, different levels. For instance, I understand introverted thinking based on its concept, its theory in the book, and that's one layer, that's one level. But then I understand it based on my experience of it, and that's another level, right? And then I could understand it based on how the other people perceived it, and that's another level. When you really like making your understanding more and more sophisticated, it could lead you to find those cross sections among like different levels. Those in common among different levels is usually like much more accurate than like what you get from just one single layers or levels of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Instead of one data point, take a multi-prong approach and look for different vantage angles and see what they tell you. What I appreciate about introverted thinking is that it's willing to question its base assumptions and there's a level of third person detachedness it has over its own
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and so it's able to make it accurate and clean, um, depending on the person. So there's
Yeah,
always that framework you create in your own head. So if there's any faulty assumptions within one's own framework, a TI dominant could also be pretty stubborn there.
when I was in my high school, I always come up with some 40 ways of doing math, which were inaccurate, but I found it logically like sense making a lot. And I was so excited, go to my math teacher and say, look, I find a new way of doing this. He took a look and told me, okay, Joshua, again, like you couldn't really do that in that step. It repeated itself. I find myself ignoring some facts actually. That's what often happened with introverted judging functions. We tend to ignore some of the informations to make our judgment sound to ourselves. My goal, like my motivation, isn't to prove it in the outside world, but it is to prove it to myself. So like, yeah, there's a difficulty in treating all informations fairly.
Mm, yeah. There is this filtering that happens, and so while you prove it to yourself, it can become more certain, and so you can accidentally filter out the and ignore information outside of that too. I
Mm-hmm.
guess introverted functions or introverted judging functions is like you're honing in on something. I guess with all introverted functions in general, there might be a narrowing.
Mm-hmm.
So
It is.
definitely see
Mm,
that.
I once used this metaphor. In ancient time, people use ankle to measure stuffs
Hmm.
because they don't really have rulers. So if they want to know about length, they use ankle. So like I when I read about it, it was so interesting. I asked the question, okay, like but different people have different ankles, right? Like the ankles, the lengths are different. And then the teacher told me that it doesn't really matter because for them, it's it's the ankle are used as the concept of length. It's not to make sure that everyone's ankle are the same length, but it helps them to having judgments about length for themselves. I don't really serve the entire world, serve the entire community.
Yeah, it's a subjective judgment that you can prove something to yourself, like TI.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
a good metaphor for sure. And
Yeah.
so, thank you so much, Joshua, for coming out today. And so,
Mm-hmm.
feel free to check out his channel below on Bilibili, if you speak Mandarin, that is. And so, he's very lovely, as you can tell. His TI is sharp as a knife. This is going to help people that are on their pathway to determining their best fit type, especially because you have the humility to change your type too. I find that very courageous and bold to be able to know the truth and then let people know about the truth as well when you figured it out. And
I
so,
well, I mean, the last point to make, it's something that people tell me a lot that, okay, like Joshua, you have this, like, for instance, like humility or you have this courage. For me, like what took place inside myself, it isn't really like humility or courage. It is what it is what it is. What's the point of like not changing it after I knowing that it like this truth? If I give it on a second thought, I could think about all those very severe consequences. I run a channel and like if I make it publicly that okay, I mistyped myself, it could have very bad influence. But I just didn't really give a second thought on it. I made this video like talking about myself changing types. I think it's 2 days right after I know I'm certain that I was mistyped. I think that's what's going on with extroverted sensing. It's like you don't really give a second thought on it, so that you just allow things to move in a very flow state and just follow the gut feelings.
yeah, even the phrase "it is what it is" a very extroverted sensing phrase. It just naturally makes sense to do that. For sure. I totally agree.
I'm really happy that you think I'm very humiliated.
Yeah, I'll always say that TI users are something, and they'll say, Joyce, I'm not that. So I'll say, oh, you're very shy. And they're like, I'm not shy, Joyce. I just don't talk a lot. That there's a difference between those two things.
Yeah, because there's a lot of categories. Like there's something common, but there's something different. Next time you could ask them, okay, then what are you? I mean, you're not shy, then what are you? It could take them like years to answer that.
Yeah, like introverted thinking can tell immediately if things don't seem quite right. They're like, not really. But it might take a while to find what really fits there particularly. So,
Mhm.
all right. So thank you so
Great.
much for your
Thank you.
wisdom and for being on this channel. And
Yeah.
yeah, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next one. Take
Bye
care.
bye.